Alcatraz laundry room, August 1936. Steam rises from industrial washers. 47 inmates fold prison sheets in silence. Al Capone, 37 years old, works like any common prisoner. Then James Lucas walks past and stops. The bank robber leans forward and spits directly into Capone's face. Saliva hits his cheek, drips down to his collar. The entire room goes dead silent. Washers still churning, but nobody moves. Nobody breathes. Over 200 inmates in that prison knew Capone's Chicago reputation. 300 murders ordered, $100 million empire built on blood and bribes. Guards watch through the reinforced window, hands moving to their batons, bracing for the bloodbath. Capone reaches into his pocket, pulls out a white handkerchief, monogrammed with his initials AC in careful embroidery. He wipes his face slowly, methodically, folds the handkerchief, returns it to his pocket, says nothing, does nothing, walks away. Lucas stands frozen. He expected retaliation. He got silence. What happened next made every prisoner in Alcatraz understand what real power actually looks like. Before Alcatraz, Al Capone was the king of Chicago. By the late 1920s, he controlled every speakeasy, every gambling den, every politician who mattered. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929 made him a legend. 7 rival gangsters executed in a garage. Capone's signature brutality on full display. Newspapers called him Scarface, public enemy number 1. His empire generated an estimated $100 million annually. He owned judges, bribed cops, operated with impunity. In 1931, they finally got him. Not for murder, not for bootlegging, but for tax evasion. The only thing they could prove. Sentenced to 11 years. First sent to Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, where he basically ran the place from his cell. Smuggled in typewriters, made phone calls, orchestrated business. In August 1934, the Bureau of Prisons transferred him to their new experiment. Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, built on an island in San Francisco Bay, specifically for inmates who couldn't be controlled anywhere else. The rules were absolute. No privileges, no special treatment, everyone equal. Capone was assigned to laundry duty, same work as bank robbers, murderers, common thieves. He was allowed one personal possession, a white handkerchief with his initials embroidered on the corner. By August 1936, Capone had been working Alcatraz laundry for 2 years. Quiet, obedient, never causing problems. Other inmates watched him, waiting to see if the legend was real or just Chicago smoke. James Lucas, a convicted bank robber serving 15 years, decided to find out. Lucas had his own reputation. Violent, unpredictable, had attacked guards twice, feared by other inmates. But he'd been watching Capone follow orders, keep his head down, never fight back. Lucas believed what he saw. Weakness. On August 23, 1936, at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon, Lucas made his move. The laundry room smelled like industrial soap and hot cotton, washers rumbling, steam obscuring the ceiling. 47 inmates present, all watching. Lucas walked up to Capone's folding station, stood close enough to touch, and spat directly in his face. Saliva connected with Capone's left cheek, visible to everyone. Capone didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the white handkerchief, the one with AC embroidered in the corner, and wiped his face clean. Folded the handkerchief carefully, put it back in his pocket, continued folding sheets, never said a word, never looked at Lucas, just returned to work. Lucas stood there confused. The room stayed silent. Guards in the observation booth radioed for backup, expecting violence. Nothing happened. The next 3 days, Alcatraz hummed with a different energy. Word spread fast. Lucas had spit in Capone's face, and Capone did nothing. Inmates who'd whispered about the Chicago boss now spoke openly. Capone's finished. He's weak. The Chicago legend was bullshit. Lucas got bolder, told the story over and over, embellished it, claimed he broke the famous Al Capone. Other inmates started testing boundaries, cutting in front of Capone in the meal line, taking his usual seat in the yard, making comments just loud enough to hear. Capone maintained his routine. Breakfast at 6, laundry duty at 7, lunch at noon, back to work until 5, dinner at 6, cell by 8. Never responded, never reacted, never changed expression. Prison staff noticed, but didn't understand. Why wasn't Capone defending himself? According to prison doctors' notes, later made public, Capone's syphilis was progressing, affecting his mental clarity, causing confusion and mood swings. But people close to him, other inmates who worked near him, said something different. They said he was still sharp, still calculating, that he watched everything. The white handkerchief remained in his left pocket, folded and clean. He took it out once a day to wipe his face during the afternoon heat. The gesture became routine, ordinary. Nobody paid attention to it anymore, except Capone. What Capone noticed, nobody else did. James Lucas worked the kitchen. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, Lucas had access to food storage, to extra rations, to contraband that moved through that prison-like currency. Capone started watching, not obviously, just quiet observation during yard time, during meals, during the moments when inmates moved between stations. Lucas had patterns. He'd slip extra bread under his shirt, hide cheese in his pockets, smuggle food back to his cell. Small violations, but violations nonetheless. In Alcatraz, the rules were absolute. Any contraband meant solitary confinement, what inmates called the hole. A dark cell with no contact, no privileges, sometimes weeks of isolation. Lucas also had allies. 3 other inmates who protected him, enforced his small-time black market deals, made sure nobody interfered with his kitchen access. But Capone saw Lucas's weakness too: paranoia. The man constantly checked over his shoulder, constantly worried about who was watching, constantly looking for threats. Lucas bribed Officer Malone with contraband cigarettes for small privileges, an extra minute in the shower, a slight delay before lights out. Nothing major, but enough to matter. The other inmates didn't realize what Capone understood. Information was power here, not violence. The handkerchief stayed in his pocket, a reminder. In Chicago, he'd controlled through fear and money. In Alcatraz, neither worked. By the 4th day after the incident, Capone had mapped Lucas's entire operation. The kitchen smuggling ran on a schedule. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 a.m. Lucas would arrive early, claim he was prepping vegetables, actually pocket extra rations. He'd store them under his bunk until evening, then distribute to his 3 allies in exchange for protection and services. The system worked because nobody cared enough to look closely. Guards assumed kitchen workers occasionally snacked. Other inmates figured it was standard prison economy. But Alcatraz had zero-tolerance policies. Warden James A. Johnston had built his reputation on absolute discipline and rehabilitation through structure. Johnston, the prison's first warden, believed in breaking criminal behavior through routine and isolation, not brutality. Any contraband violation was treated as serious as an assault. Capone knew this because he'd seen it happen. An inmate caught with smuggled cigarettes spent 19 days in solitary. Another inmate found with an extra blanket, 14 days. The math was simple. Lucas's paranoia was justified, but his execution was sloppy. He hid food poorly, trusted too many people, operated on the assumption that nobody would rat him out. Capone didn't need to do anything violent. He just needed to wait for the right moment and make sure the right person noticed at the right time. The handkerchief in his pocket felt lighter now. Not because it weighed less, but because it represented something different. Control wasn't about reaction. It was about patience. Warden Johnston heard about the spitting incident from 3 different sources within an hour of it happening. Guards filed reports. Inmates talked. The story reached his office before dinner. Johnston was in his 3rd year running Alcatraz, and he'd been watching Al Capone carefully since the transfer from Atlanta. Capone's restraint impressed him. Most notorious criminals cracked under Alcatraz's isolation and routine, but Capone adapted. He followed rules, kept quiet, caused 0 problems. Johnston believed in redemption through discipline, but he also believed in absolute order. James Lucas was the opposite, disruptive, violent, unpredictable. Lucas had attacked 2 guards in the past 18 months, instigated 3 fights with other inmates, and constantly pushed boundaries. Johnston wanted Lucas gone, transferred to another facility, isolated, removed from the general population. But he needed justification, documentation, a reason that would satisfy federal oversight. A spitting incident wasn't enough. Assault charges required witnesses willing to testify, and nobody testified in Alcatraz. Johnston started paying closer attention to Lucas's daily routine, noting patterns, looking for violations. He didn't know Capone was doing the same thing. The convergence was accidental but inevitable. When Johnston ordered increased random cell inspections for all inmates in Lucas's block, he wasn't targeting Lucas specifically, just tightening security. But the timing aligned perfectly with Capone's plan. By midweek, guards were doing sweeps every Tuesday and Thursday morning, right after kitchen duty. Lucas noticed the increased attention, became more paranoid, started making mistakes. And Capone, he just kept folding laundry, that white handkerchief in his pocket. On Thursday, August 27th, Capone made one subtle move. During the afternoon break in the prison yard, he stood near the fence where Officer Malone was monitoring inmates. Malone, the guard Lucas had been bribing, was young, nervous, constantly worried about losing his job. Capone positioned himself casually, looking out at San Francisco Bay, and said one sentence: "Kitchen smells different on Thursdays. Notice that?" He didn't look at Malone, didn't wait for a response, just walked away. The comment planted itself in Malone's mind. That evening, Malone walked past the kitchen during his rounds, paid attention to smells, to movements, to activity. Didn't see anything obvious, but the seed was there. 2 days later, Capone made another move. He mentioned to an inmate named Tommy Chen, a low-level counterfeiter who talked to everyone, that Lucas seemed to be eating better than the rest of them. "Must have connections," Capone said casually. "Wonder where he gets the extra food." Chen, always looking for angles, started watching Lucas, started mentioning it to other inmates. The rumor spread naturally, the way rumors do in enclosed spaces. Lucas has extra food, Lucas is hoarding, Lucas is getting privileges nobody else gets. Within 48 hours, half the prison was paying attention to Lucas's eating habits, his kitchen access, his routine. Lucas felt the scrutiny, became more careful, which made him more obvious. On Thursday morning, September 3rd, Lucas brought contraband food back to his cell. Bread wrapped in a kitchen towel, cheese in his pocket, an apple hidden under his shirt. He hid it under his bunk, poorly, because he was rushing. Because he was nervous. Because everyone was watching. August 30th, 1936, 7 days after the spitting incident. Guards conducted a routine cell inspection. Standard procedure, happened weekly, nothing unusual. But this time, they were thorough. Every cell in Lucas's block got searched, bunks lifted, floors checked, belongings examined. When they reached Lucas's cell, they found it immediately. Bread, cheese, extra rations wrapped in a kitchen towel and shoved under his bunk. The evidence was undeniable. Officer Malone was the one who discovered it, which made it worse. Lucas's bribed ally now had to report him or risk his own job. Malone reported it. Within an hour, Lucas was escorted to solitary confinement. The whole 19 days, standard punishment for contraband violations. The prison grapevine worked fast. By dinner, everyone knew. Lucas got caught. Lucas was in solitary. Lucas screwed up. And slowly, quietly, inmates started connecting dots. Capone hadn't done anything violent, hadn't fought, hadn't threatened, hadn't retaliated. But 7 days after being publicly humiliated, Lucas was gone. The math wasn't hard. Inmates who'd watched Capone for 2 years suddenly understood. The Chicago boss didn't operate on prison rules. He operated on a different level entirely. Information, patience, subtle manipulation. Lucas's 3 allies, the inmates who'd protected him, quietly distanced themselves. Being associated with Lucas now meant being associated with failure. Respect in Alcatraz wasn't about who could fight. It was about who could survive, adapt, win without throwing a punch. Capone returned to his laundry duty routine. Same schedule, same quiet demeanor, same white handkerchief in his pocket. But the atmosphere around him changed. Inmates gave him space, not out of fear, but out of recognition. September 18th, 1936. Lucas emerged from solitary confinement. 19 days in complete darkness, minimal food, no human contact. He looked thinner, paler, broken. The guards escorted him back to general population, back to his regular routine. First day back, laundry duty. Same room where he'd spit in Capone's face nearly a month earlier. Lucas entered, kept his head down, moved to his assigned folding station. The room was full. 40-plus inmates, steam rising from washers, the smell of industrial soap thick in the air. Capone was there, working his usual station, folding sheets with mechanical precision. Every inmate in that room knew the story. Everyone was watching. Lucas walked to his station, started folding, tried to pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Halfway through the shift, Capone paused. He reached into his left pocket, pulled out the white handkerchief. A C embroidered in the corner, same one he'd used to wipe the spit from his face. He unfolded it slowly, held it for a moment, just looking at it. Then he turned, walked across the room, and stopped directly in front of Lucas. Held the handkerchief out, didn't say a word, just offered it. The gesture was clear. Take it, use it, acknowledge what happened. Lucas stared at the handkerchief, white fabric, careful embroidery, Capone's initials. He understood the message. This wasn't mercy. This was dominance disguised as civility. If Lucas took the handkerchief, he'd be accepting his position beneath Capone. If he refused, he'd insult Capone again, and this time there'd be no protection. Lucas kept his hands at his sides. Refused. Turned back to his work. Capone folded the handkerchief, returned it to his pocket, and walked back to his station. The room stayed silent. But the message had been delivered. Power in Alcatraz wasn't about violence. It was about making your enemy destroy themselves. Lucas had tried to humiliate Capone publicly. Capone responded by exposing Lucas's vulnerabilities through information and patience. The handkerchief, that ordinary piece of fabric with embroidered initials, had transformed. It wasn't just a possession anymore. It was a symbol. Proof that control doesn't require brutality. By mid-September, prison hierarchy shifted. Inmates stopped testing Capone. The whispers changed from mockery to respect. People gave him space in the meal line, nodded when he passed, understood that the Chicago legend wasn't about muscle. It was about strategy. Lucas lost everything. His kitchen access, his cigarette trade, his allies, his status. His 3 former protectors now avoided him. Nobody wanted to be associated with the man who tried to break Capone and failed. Lucas became invisible. The story goes that Capone never spoke about the incident, never explained his strategy, never claimed victory. He just continued his routine: breakfast, laundry, dinner, cell. The white handkerchief stayed in his pocket, folded and clean. But the legend spread. Capone doesn't fight, inmates told each other. He waits, he watches. And when you're weakest, you realize he's been playing a different game the whole time. Warden Johnston noted it in his report. Subject Capone demonstrates unusual restraint and adaptability. No disciplinary issues. Respects authority. Model prisoner behavior. What Johnston didn't write: Capone had proven that true power operates beneath official channels, in the spaces between rules. By late 1936, Al Capone's mind was deteriorating. The syphilis he'd contracted years earlier, never properly treated, was progressing into neurosyphilis, affecting his cognitive functions, his memory, his emotional regulation. Prison doctors documented the decline. Moments of confusion, difficulty with complex tasks, occasional disorientation. But the handkerchief ritual remained constant. Every morning, Capone would sit on his bunk, take out the white handkerchief, unfold it, examine the AC embroidery, refold it carefully, and place it in his left pocket. The routine became mechanical, almost unconscious, but it grounded him, gave him something to control when everything else, his empire, his freedom, his health, had been stripped away. Other inmates noticed. Even as Capone's mental state wavered, even as he sometimes forgot names or lost track of conversations, the handkerchief stayed with him. Constant, symbolic. By 1937, James Lucas was quietly transferred to another federal facility. His Alcatraz stay ended not with drama, but with bureaucratic paperwork. He never recovered his status, never rebuilt his reputation. He'd become a cautionary tale. Don't test the legends, even when they seem weak. Especially when they seem weak. The inmates who'd witnessed the spitting incident told the story for years, some in Alcatraz, some after their release, some to journalists and writers who asked about life on the island. The story evolved, gained details, became part of prison mythology. But the core remained true. Capone turned humiliation into a lesson without throwing a single punch. The lesson spread beyond Alcatraz, into other federal prisons, into criminal culture. True power isn't about reaction, it's about response. It's about controlling the game, not just winning the fight. In November 1939, Al Capone was released from federal custody. His sentence was complete, his time served. He was 40 years old, his mind damaged beyond repair, his empire long dissolved. He returned to his Palm Island estate in Florida, where he'd spend the remaining years of his life in declining health, barely recognizing family members, a shadow of the man who'd once controlled Chicago. He died in January 1947 from cardiac arrest following a stroke. Official cause, though the syphilis had destroyed him years earlier. History remembers Capone for the St. Valentine's Day massacre, for his bootlegging empire, for being public enemy number 1. But in Alcatraz, among the inmates who served time there, he's remembered differently. For the day he chose silence over violence. For the white handkerchief he used to wipe spit from his face. For proving that power operates on levels most people never understand. James Lucas died in prison in 1998, having served over 60 years in various federal facilities. In 1976, a journalist tracked him down for an interview about Alcatraz. Lucas was asked about the famous inmates he'd known. Machine Gun Kelly, Robert Stroud, the Birdman, Al Capone. When asked specifically about the spitting incident, Lucas went quiet. Then he said one sentence. Capone won without fighting. That's the part nobody understands. The journalist pressed for details. Lucas refused to elaborate. The story ended there. The lesson didn't. In prison culture, the story became codified, compressed into a single rule. Reaction is weakness. Response is power. It's still repeated in federal facilities today, passed from old-timers to new inmates, a legend that teaches what force never can. Today, the Alcatraz tour guides sometimes tell the story. Sanitized, compressed, turned into entertainment for tourists walking through the empty cell blocks. They point to the laundry room, now silent and abandoned, and mention that Al Capone worked there. Some guides tell the spitting story, though most get the details wrong. They say Capone fought back, or that Lucas was punished directly, or that it ended with violence. The truth is quieter, more complicated, harder to fit into a 15-minute tour. The white handkerchief, the real one with AC embroidered in silk thread, allegedly survived. According to prison records, Capone's personal effects were cataloged when he left Alcatraz in 1939. The handkerchief was listed. Some sources claim a guard kept it as a souvenir. Others say it was returned to Capone's family. In 2003, an auction house in Chicago claimed to be selling Al Capone's personal handkerchief from Alcatraz, but authenticity was never verified. The item sold for $4,200 to a private collector who never revealed their identity. Real or fake, the object became legend. What Capone demonstrated in that laundry room in August 1936 was simple but profound. Power isn't about dominating through force. It's about understanding systems, leveraging information, controlling outcomes through patience and precision. He turned humiliation into strategy, turned silence into dominance, turned an ordinary piece of fabric into a symbol that outlasted his empire. In Alcatraz, Capone learned what Chicago never taught him. Violence is easy. Anyone can fight. Anyone can retaliate. But making your enemy destroy themselves while you stand there, quiet and clean, handkerchief in your pocket, that's the most dangerous weapon there is.